Okay, I think we have most of the, invitees already there. I think few are joining. I think it's good to start on time. I welcome you all for the digital meet focused on, roadmap development for foodborne diseases, monitoring in Bangladesh. Of course, this is a study initiated by Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Food Safety. I'm so delighted to have some of the important participants today. We have almost we expect about 24 participants. I think 19 are already there. We have with us quite a number of, leadership from Bangladesh, from United States. And of course, I'm currently from Hyderabad in India. And my name is Vijay Raghavan. I'm from Sathguru. I led the study, for the project. We have, of course, I could see Dr. Ahmed Kaplan from USAID, Dr. Meera Chandra from United States. From AID mission in Bangladesh, we have Dr. Anuruddha Rai and Mehdi Hassan may be joining us. We have from the Food Safety Innovation Lab, Dr. Haley Oliver and Dr. Randy Varobo, Haley from Purdue and Randy from Cornell. And we have from industry, some important folks from PON and others. And we have from Bangladesh Food Safety Authority as well, senior leadership participating today. So I think it's a great opportunity to discuss the next 1 hour approaches that we have, looked at for Bangladesh to look at prioritizing foodborne disease monitoring. I now request Dr. Haley Oliver to provide opening remarks and sensitize about the Food Safety Innovation Lab, please. Over to Haley. Subra, can you load the presentation? Haley, Subra can, our technical coordinator, can change the slides as you, advance it, and may request others to remain muted so that it's, preventing noises to be disrupting.
Wonderful, Vijay. Thank you. Well, good morning and good afternoon and evening to all of you. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's a beautiful day in the middle of the United States. It's going to be hot, but that's pretty typical for this time of year. But it's my pleasure to introduce the USAID Feed the Future Food Safety Innovation Lab, which I have the pleasure of directing with my co-director, Dr. Randy Warobo at Cornell University. And this is a slightly unique model in that we have co-leadership of this laboratory between two universities that really have had a long history of food safety and food science. So on the next slide is a brief overview of what the Food Safety Innovation Lab is. And as I mentioned, it's a Purdue and Cornell University partnership, but it's a $10 million investment in AID. The project that began in 2019 will continue through 2024. We do have a potential ceiling of $20 million in associate awards and buy-ins, but we hope to continue to expand the research portfolio in food safety as appropriate. But we are in the middle of an RFA process to fund research in food safety, looks to combine private sector, government, and consumer stakeholders, finding ways to truly support food safety at the country level. We realize that food safety is a farm to fork challenge, so starting with everything from agricultural practices to food safety at retail are all a part of our priorities. And our focus countries are Bangladesh, Cambodia, Kenya, and Senegal. Of course, we're here to focus on Bangladesh today. Next slide. Thank you. So it's known to probably everyone on this call because there's a vested interest in food safety in each of for each of us. And we know that approximately 120,000 children die from foodborne illness each year, and that we have 600 million cases of foodborne illness globally, which is, of course, a significant number, and a number we try not to lose track of here in the global pandemic of COVID. Food safety hasn't stopped, and foodborne disease also hasn't stopped. So our approach, what we know about food safety is that unsafe foods can certainly inhibit access to higher value markets, and that advanced technologies can certainly accelerate some access to those markets, but sometimes some of those technology hurdles are too large and inappropriate for some markets. In the Global Food Safety Partnership meta-analysis, what their major conclusions were from that study is that there's an opportunity to redirect how food safety is thought of, and that bacterial contamination needs to remain. Next, please. Thank you. So as a part of the structure of the Food Safety Innovation Lab, and again, Purdue and Cornell are the management entities, or sort of the shepherds of the research portfolio that is USAID's investment in food safety research. And so our quick starts are our initial research investments that are occurring in year one. So really, as we can see, kind of the breadth of the portfolio ranges from some desktop analyses to assessments of opportunities for food safety investments to very fundamental food safety research looking for pathogens in retail foods like we might see in Cambodia. So I'm really excited to see today that some of the outputs and major conclusions from the Bangladesh QuickStarts that do inform the next investments of the Food Safety Innovation Lab to help us prioritize where a USAID investment can have the greatest impact. Next slide, please. So that means I turn the reins back over to Sathguru, and again, really looking forward to the major conclusions from this QuickStart study.
Thank you, Dr. Oliver. We now have Dr. Satya, presenting some of the glimpses of the study, focusing on some of the observations and thoughts of some of the leaders on food safety and testing capability in Bangladesh, and some of the key challenges and suggestions that have been brought up. Over to Satya.
Thank you, Vijay. I'm happy to be presenting the results and summary of the interactions which we had in the interactions in Bangladesh with respect to QuickStart project in Bangladesh. Next one, please. So just to give you a big background on the project, of what the objectives of the project were. So the project aimed to basically study the existing food safety risks in Bangladesh, and also just to understand and assess the regulatory framework and scientific capability in Bangladesh.
It's not clear.
Oh, okay, sir. Am I better now?
Yeah, much better. Yeah.
Okay. So the project basically aimed at studying the existing food safety risks in Bangladesh, and also assess regulatory framework, scientific capability in Bangladesh, and addressing the food safety, and also assessing the industry preparedness in addressing the risks, and also see if there are any major gaps in the food safety systems there. So the idea of the project was to have to help improve the existing food safety practices and lay a foundation for undertaking a science-based approach for monitoring foodborne diseases and other hazards. Next one. So quickly move on to the summary of interactions. Next one, please. So we approached this project basically by identifying critical stakeholders responsible for food safety in Bangladesh. We will have a slide on various stakeholders we interacted with. And based on the interactions which we had, coupled with secondary research based on existing reports and work done by other agencies, we assess the food safety risks, the regulatory framework and scientific capability and the industry practices. And also based on this discussion and secondary research, we have the competency or assess the current institutional capability to detect or monitor foodborne diseases, which were basically including human resources and the lab infrastructure. Based on our assessment, we were supposed to have a workshop, consultative workshop in Bangladesh, Dhaka, to identify critical action points and present our findings. But unfortunately, due to the current pandemic and travel restrictions, we could not hold this workshop, and we had to do it digitally today. So the idea of this workshop was basically to present our findings to the stakeholders whom we interacted with. Next. Thank you. So we would like to take this opportunity for all the stakeholders who took their time off and spend some time explaining us about the work which they do and what are the various food safety practices and the food safety risks prevalent in the country. We had 2 rounds of visits, one in January and one in March, for in-person consultations. We visited regulatory and standard bodies, basically the BFSA and BSTI. We also interacted with government departments, basically Department of Fisheries, the FIQC lab, and the CDIL, Department of Livestock, Central Disease Investigation lab. And we also interacted with public testing lab. One was NFSL, National Food Safety Lab under IPH. And we also visited a modern food testing lab under City Corporation, Dhaka. We also interacted with the research institutes and academia, basically 3 under a BCS labs, IFST, BSR Chittagong lab, and Food Analysis Research Lab, CARS, and Dhaka University. We also had interactions with industry associations, Bangladesh Frozen Food Exporters Association, Bangladesh Shrimp and Fish Foundation, Hotex Foundation, and we also interacted with private companies, basically Pran, HIF Agro, and also Sugna Food and Feed. And we also interacted with private testing labs like SGS and Baffin labs. In addition to these interactions, personal interactions, we had gathered information from secondary research as well. Next, thank you. So just to list few observations. Bangladesh Food Safety Authority is a relatively young body, in place since 2015, and there's a lot of opportunity to improve regulatory coordination. BFSA being the main regulatory coordination, it interacts with several departments and ministries, and there's always a scope to improve the coordination for regulatory aspects. And they do have few labs for testing, but we found that the current levels of testing were not fully utilizing the existing infrastructure. They could, some of the labs were just doing few hundreds to few thousands in a year. So they could be doing some more. One of the observations which we also find was there was a low industry demand for food testing. When we interacted with few testing labs, especially the private ones, we came to know that the demand was not much, except for the mandatory testing which was required as part of the inspection or facility inspection or required for imports or exports. So again, one of the challenge which we observed when interacting with the public labs was the limited trained manpower, because some of the labs expressed requirement of training on handling the modern equipment or handling the testing as per the protocols which were internationally accepted. Another aspects which came in was unequal distribution of accredited labs. There were few accredited labs. Very few of the public labs were accredited for some of the parameters, and that too not for all. Of course, a major issue with some of these public labs, they do not have a regulatory mandate for regulatory testing. Most of them are academic or research institutes, so, and also that also prevents them from going from an accreditation which would require dedicated resources for following up on accreditation process and maintaining documentation and other things. I think this is one gap which was evident from public labs which did not have a mandate for regulatory testing. And but also we had also observed that all the the accredited labs were not present throughout the country. Most of the private labs are present in capital city, that is Dhaka, but the food industries, which is comprising mostly of MSMEs, is present throughout the country. So there is an unequal distribution of accredited labs throughout the country. Next one, please. Another observation, which is an opportunity to for building on the data on food manufacturing facilities, the kind of subsectors, and also the associated food risks. Unfortunately, BFSA does not currently do the registration of these food facilities, which is being currently done by other ministries and other agencies under different ministries, like the BSTI or some could be related to Department of Fisheries or Department of Livestock, based on the sector which they belong to. So there's a lack of data on the number of registered food manufacturing facilities and service providers. The data may be there, but which is available with different agencies. So I think there's an opportunity to have make the data available on a real-time basis and share it with agencies which are responsible for food safety in a coordinated way. So that was one of the observations which could be an opportunity for improvement. Next ones. Yeah. Well, this is very, if you describe the food industry in Bangladesh, apart from few major large food industry units which are very large or which can afford testing on their own, most of the food industry is accounted by MSMEs, which is close to 99% of total food and beverage processing industry in Bangladesh, and which cannot afford dedicated microbial or advanced testing facilities at their premises. So this creates a limited access to testing support, both on access to physical infrastructure of labs being not present in the region, or also in sometimes it's affordability. Sometimes there is a perception that the cost of testing is high in private labs. Next one, please. Yeah, based on the some of the major observations which we observed, I think we just came up with a critical action points which I think which would be taken forward, discussed by Vijay. Thank you.
Thank you, Satya. I just want to communicate to all the colleagues on the Digital Connect that you may express your comments or questions or thoughts on the chat, and we'll have some time for discussions, certainly. So let me look at some of the critical action points that we want to flag here. One is certainly increasing the demand for fresh and processed food. And the second thing, as Dr. Satya indicated, real-time data sharing across agencies. We'll discuss about it. Provision of hands-on training to food testing labs and technicians. We'd also like to look at adoption of large-scale rapid detection methods by SME, and a judicious blend of self-assessment and third-party assessment potential for enlarged testing. So those are the key elements we'll briefly discuss now. Subra, next one. So if you look at the factors resulting in low demand, I think one of the things is that as BFSA is doing a great job of bringing newer regulatory framework for different kind of different set of different categories of foods. As these formulated regulations get notified, I think you'll have much more mandatory testing demand coming in. So there's a need to gear up for meeting that demand as we go along. Beyond mandatory testing, of course, we also see that the need for industry to go for voluntary testing would also be forthcoming. So all of that will trigger much higher demand for food testing as we go along. The key fact is that I think as more and more categories of food come under regulations, I think the mandatory testing itself will be considerably large. The second element is lack of awareness of food safety management system and benefit of food safety implementation value chain. we also see that customer-driven demand testing is likely to rise with the customer education that itself has been now taken up by BFSA. Industry players too may adopt to self-regulation as the market recognizes safe food. I think we do see that the demand pull from the market, the consumers, as well as the trigger of more and more regulations by the regulatory agencies will require considerable amount of capacity for food testing to be pursued. The third element is cost of implementation and testing. It's a very, very important point. Affordability is currently a real challenge for food testing. You know, if you look at close to about 42,000 registered entities in Bangladesh, 95% is small and medium enterprises. You know, 50% of them, what we have seen is having revenue of less than $100,000 a year. And 1/3 of them have from $100,000 to $1 million a year as revenue. Just about a little less than 6% have revenues of over $3 million a year. That's really large number of micro enterprises preparing food for the consumers there. So we need to look at how a small company with 1 or 2 products, there are 5,000 bakeries in the country, literally speaking. They're all small bakers, making about $100,000 a year or even less. So how can they ensure food safety? How can the small and medium enterprises, ensure food safety? Adopting some of the measures that are cost effective is a key question there. Subra, next. So the demand for food testing can be certainly increased. Currently the food demand itself is growing in border of double digit. With economic prosperity, the demand for both fresh as well as processed food is going to increase considerably. And a rise in the demand for contamination checks for all categories of food, be it meat or poultry or dairy or fruits or vegetable, is expected to drive the segment growth clearly for several of these segments. And that will further increase the demand for food testing. And that's why we see a spiraling effect. Food testing enhancing the demand for safe food, and demand for food enhancing the demand for food testing. So I think we need to be gearing ourselves to meet that kind of a demand requirement. Improving access to testing labs is very, very important. At reduced cost. One of the things you found is that all of the agencies we looked at, be it IFST, BCSIR, Institute of Fisheries, the FAQC, the Public Health Institute, Dhaka Food Testing Lab, all of them have a great infrastructure, well-trained people. The capacity utilization is low. We see that, with the current infrastructure, at least 25 to 30-fold testing can be done, clearly speaking. But access to samples are a challenge. As Satya said, there is geographical disparity. These SMEs are widely spread in thousands of square kilometers. So how can we have a cluster approach? The cluster approach taken by fishery has worked very well for shrimp today, and Bangladesh today is able to comply very well to international standards. There can be probably a similar cluster approach for SME clusters to have common infrastructure for testing. And how can we also look at cost coming down by Ubering samples? Today when I go to Dhaka, I get food delivered, wherever I am there. There are Food Panda, etc., which are doing excellent delivery of food. Ubering, samples today is so common across the world today. Central labs do get, samples collected in various sample collection centers. And, these are well-trained collection centers who know how to handle a sample, food sample. And then the people Ubering the sample are well-trained on how to handle sample, reach the central lab. And today, after testing, results are all put online real time. So I think with the technology today, it's possible that samples across the country are brought to these excellent, well infrastructure-driven, people-driven labs, and they can do far more number of samples. That itself will bring down number of bring down cost per sample substantially to 1/5 or 1/6, I would say. This also, of course, requires some bit of coordination among regulatory agencies, because there are multiple labs which are excellent. They can have earmarked access to samples, and that will bring down, the cost per sample as well. Industry itself should be encouraged to adopt to HACCP in a wide scale. I think the authority has provided incentive, the Ministry of Industry has provided incentive for companies to adopt the standards. Probably it needs to percolate down to every kind of a micro enterprise that will bring substantial amount of self-regulation within the small scale industry itself. Satya, thank you. One of the things you say is, an element of data points that are spread out. We do see that, there are some good vital information, especially public health department on, disease surveillance. Some of them relate to foodborne diseases. There is a whole lot of data registration on food establishments, type of establishments, locations. So I think a kind of a robust integrated disease surveillance system is possible if at all we network the data today. I think there is substantial data there, covering various existing surveillance efforts, human health, animal health. The zoonotic disease has triggered certain amount of data collection on zoonotic diseases framework today. The poultry industry is adopting it. There is, a whole lot of data on cattle industry, on account of foot and mouth disease. So I think we have disease outbreaks data, we have registered, licensed food facility data, manufacturing facility inspection data, import and export data. I think there's a great kind of opportunity for integrating data access and then creating a framework where judicious data, driven surveillance can be put in place. And clearly speaking, with current data science analytics and storage cost, this can be done at very, very affordable cost, really providing Bangladesh a leading edge in South Asia to trigger surveillance system. Next one. In terms of skill sets, the skill of existing manpower in handling and use of modern equipment certainly needs upgradation, but I would say that there is a good capability there, but the people are limited. I think if the testing is going to be moved to fivefold with collection centers, vibrant collection centers, private sector engaged in collection and providing it to these referral labs, and private sector themselves coming in to handle number of samples, I think there's the essential cohort of food safety testing specialists will be required. Chemical, molecular testing infrastructure is there, but I think people support will be needed. Infrastructure will grow as the demand grows. I think more people will be needed. So I think that's the important thing. Reskilling, some of them would also be required in terms of technician level. Conventional chromatography methods require certainly costly reagents, that's not produced in Bangladesh. So that's one thing we found, that some impediment to large scale handling of these equipment is also lack of locally produced reagents. I think making those reagents available at kind of a low import duty or well accessible reagents would also be useful. Someone that can be prepared in country itself, I think with trained people who can probably provide support to all other private labs as well. So I think these are opportunities that we perceive in that. Next, Subra. One of the things that we see is that how can we support these micro enterprises with revenue of less than 100,000, 100,000 to $1 million a year, who can't really create a sophisticated lab infrastructure in them. One way is, of course, to look at detection kits that are today extremely cost effective, prepared within the neighboring countries, and that can really be deployed for wide scale adoption. Today some kits are imported in Bangladesh, but there is a very high level of import duty that becomes a barrier for wide scale adoption of these kits by the SMEs. I think today is a time where every country is now looking at duty-free import of COVID detection kit that's triggered the worldwide cross flow of detection kits. And that's what we see as the opportunity in the food testing as well. Making kits affordable at low duty until Bangladesh enterprises generate their own kits will be very, very useful approach for SMEs to look at quality kits. They also need to be approved for conformity. Standards are very important. So there's reliability on the test data. So I think it's something where the BFSA might look at, have accreditation bodies, that will approve these kits for application. That becomes important as well. Next, Subra. One of the things that we see is that the kits can be single target kit, looking at basically common foodborne pathogens like Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, and chemical contaminants like pesticides, heavy metals, aflatoxins. So all of the bacterial, contaminants, all of the toxins that are there in the food can be very effectively detected using kits today. Biological kits are quite inexpensive these days, and they are mass produced, providing opportunity for some of the point of occurrence application as well as industry application internally. Even for food testing, inspections professionals from the authority, this can be very effective tool, and therefore we have seen that today, very effectively in products like dairy. Milk quality is ensured today in India with testing of milk for contaminants as well as toxins, duly deploying point of detection kits. These are costing, I would say, a fraction of a taka per test. So these are very effective tests that are widely adopted. In Bangladesh itself, we were looking at methodology for testing the BT brinjal that's coming out of the farm for protein expression. We were wondering, how do you move 30,000, 40,000 farm acre production to labs to test? So we came up with the strip test, which now is providing accurate test of the protein expression on farm. So these are today provided at a fraction of taka per testing there today. So I think these are possible by adopting innovation, adopting technologies that are out there, developing collaborative partnerships for these kits to be adopted to various contexts of testing. And one of the things I find is that Bangladesh is now into spice exports, and neighboring countries, some of them have detection kit for measuring curcumin in turmeric. And they're able to get a better price because on the spot, they're able to see how much of curcumin is expressed. So I think Bangladesh also has potential to adopt those kind of, detection kits. So I think this is something where we see strong potential for rapid testing at the industry level, giving a kind of a complementary access for testing process, while the national laboratories, private laboratories attract much more test samples by the process of Ubering sample from small enterprises to large labs, basically. I think that combination will support testing capacity by several fold in the country. Subra, next. So that's all we'd like to articulate.